It is different from, say, laying pipe in a cultivated field.
I guess I was specifically thinking in regard to tree roots. Would they pose additional difficulties?
Well, the trees would be cleared in the path of the construction activity, and then the tree roots would be removed as the ditch was created for the pipeline installation.
On page 17, line 12 to 13, in your direct testimony, it states that the minimum installation depth of the pipeline will be a minimum of 3 feet in soil and 2 feet in consolidated rock. Exactly what is consolidated rock?
It is rock area, I mean, really just all rock that has to be removed by various mechanical means, and the DOT Part 195 allows for lesser cover of the pipe if you're in a solid rock area.
Would you have to use explosives?
You do not have to use explosives.
And it said that, let's see, it said that, or you said you might not have to bury it as deeply, but, and it says that there's a minimum of 24 inches, but if the pipe is 30 inches, wouldn't it be extending above ground?
No, ma'am, those numbers are measurements from the top of the pipe to the surface of the ground.
Oh, okay, thank you. On page 18, line 3, it states that the factory coating will be re-inspected in the field. Can you briefly describe what the procedure is for doing that?
There's a visual inspection that occurs, and then before the pipe is ever put in the ditch, it's inspected with a tool referred to as a Jeep, and that tool is just looking for any discontinuity in the coating, and so it's able to make an electrical connection with the pipe, and so that it gives a beep, and that spot can be marked and repaired before the pipe is put in the ground.
You mind spelling Jeep? I mean, is it Jeep with a J or a G or?
I guess with a J. Again, it's kind of a slang term because of the sound it makes.
Okay. And will it then detect any imperfections from the pipe being stored out in the elements and from being stacked one upon another?
Again, we contacted the vendor who supplies the coating that was put on the pipe, and they indicated to us that storage for a year in atmospheric conditions would not create a problem with the effectiveness of the coating.
And on page 23, line 11, you mentioned trying to obtain control equipment from Emerson's Fisher Control Division in Marshalltown. Were you able to do that?
I know that we have control valves at our pump stations. I do not know if Fisher was a successful vendor for those control valves.
Okay. And then I know we've practically beaten to death the distance back, but I'm a little confused on the setback distance. Does it vary if the valve is near a major road? Does that make a difference?
Well, we would not be able to have any part of the surface easement encroach upon the road easement. And so anything we did on our surface site would have to be outside of the road easement.
Okay. And how far back from the Mississippi River should the boring rig be located?
I do not know exactly how far back the boring rig is. I know that the horizontal directional drill length is 7,250 feet.
Okay, could you expand on that a little, because I don't get a clear mental picture.
Well, the distance from where the boring rig will be set up and the exit point from the drill That's 7,250 feet. And so that's the length of the drill. So I mean, that includes the river crossing and the land space on either side of the river between the beginning and end of the bore in the river.
Okay, and so if the river is roughly a mile wide, and I'm just using some round figures, and that would be like 5,280,
Yes.
from that 7,000 number. So the rig then could be roughly 2,000 feet, 1,500, 2,000 feet.
Again, I haven't memorized the drawings. It's a designed and engineered crossing based on corings from our geotech folks. So I just don't know the exact distance back. I do know the length of the entire drill.
Okay, and would the railroad and the highway, be part of this calculation then?
If there is anything, road, rail, anything between the point where the drill begins in the river, then those would be crossed with the drill also.
One moment as I find my place here. Has Dakota Access obtained a voluntary easement on the preferred site for the boring rig?
I don't know the status of the easement acquisition.
So you don't know whether it would be requiring eminent domain or not?
No, I don't know the status of individual easements.
And to whom would I direct that question?
Probably to Mr. Johnson.
So would you know whether there was to be a receiver launching site at the final valve site by the Mississippi? I know there's a valve to be placed pretty close in proximity, and I just wondered if there was to be a receiver launching site as well.
No, there's not one.
And do you know how deep the river is at the point of crossing?
I know that our pipe is approximately 72 feet below the lowest point, the lowest bed point of the river through the crossing.
But you don't know the depth of the water above it?
It's on the drawing and on the plans, but I don't recall what that is.
Now, to go 72 feet under the river, and you said, we're talking 1,500, 2,000, that's something in that order back. Will there be a slope? I mean, you can't just go like a 90-degree angle. Won't you have to, in order to get the pipe down to that depth, will it require some type of gradual, I don't know.
Yes,
Descent?
ma'am. Yes, ma'am. There will be an angle of entry and an angle of exit. And conceptually, it looks like an underground arc. So you just go down and make a gentle arc and come back up. So
it's more like a parabola, or?
Yes.
Do you know is it in the drawings what those angles are?
Yes, those will be called out in the drawings.
And what is the size of the reamer that you'll be using in inches? Or
It will, there will be multiple passes made, gradually stepping up the size. I don't know what the final pass will be. It will be larger than the 30 inches that the pipe will be pulled in, but I'm not sure what the final diameter is. That can be a function of the geology that the pipe will pass through, be pulled through.
Well, with the first pilot borehole, how large would that be?
That would generally be quite small, maybe 2 to 4 inches.
Oh, And will drilling fluid be used?
Drilling fluid will be used.
And what are the pros, or why does one decide to use drilling fluid? What's the advantages?
Well, it's two things. It serves as a lubricant for the drill bit, and it also brings the rock or soil out of the borehole as it's drilled.
At this time, I'd like the runners, I'm changing what I had told you before. There's 3 that are collated. I will not be using those. There's one remaining. Yes.
Mr. Dubinsky, may we proceed?
We may.
Ms. Sorensen, you may continue.
And this article refers to a recent November 20th action in Canada because there had been a spill of boring fluid. And I just wondered if you could briefly tell us, if there were a spill while you were doing the boring, what would be your immediate actions, and what would...
We have a plan in place to where if there is generally what's referred to as a frack out, if the fluid, which are, in our case would be water and bentonite, if that occurs, then we'll have, depending on where it is, have different plans in place to contain and pick up the fluid.
And how much drilling fluid to cross the Mississippi would you anticipate having to use? In gallons, or I don't know how it's measured.
I just don't know.
Is it measured like 1 gallon of fluid to X gallons of water, or, I mean, is there some kind of ratio and proportion?
Well, it's a mixture of water and bentonite clay, and it is a fluid. The mixture is a fluid.
And how many workers will it take to operate the boring rig itself?
I don't know. The company that we hire to do the drilling will determine the number of workers they need.
Do you happen to know the name of that company?
I do not.
And how would I find out?
I don't know if that contract has been let yet.
Oh, okay. And what is an estimated time frame for installing the pipeline under the Mississippi River?
I don't know how long the bore will take.
Not wanting to badger you about not knowing how long. I mean, are we talking, a week or a month, or just a rough idea?
Again, all of them are site specific and can be weather dependent, and sometimes things go very smoothly and sometimes they're more difficult, and so Sometimes it's a shorter period of time and sometimes a longer, but I would just be guessing, and so I
Okay,
prefer not to speculate.
That's fine. But I mean, it wouldn't be a day or two.
No, ma'am.
And have you ever personally been involved with installing a crude oil pipeline under a river as large as the Mississippi anywhere in the world?
I have not been involved in a crude oil line crossing the Mississippi River, no. We hire geotech engineers to design our crossings. And so they do have experience with crossings of rivers the size of the Mississippi.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Wells?
No questions.
Mr. Pauly?
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Fry, in your testimony, you discuss, among other things, some of the things that Dakota Access is doing to protect what is known as high consequence or unusually sensitive areas. Do you recall some of that testimony?
I recall it in general. If there's something specific, I would like for you to refer me to it.
We're getting there.
Okay.
At one point, you talk about the 66 gate valves that are placed along the route of the pipeline in Iowa. Do you recall that?
Yes, I'll comment that a number of those are ball valves, but
Okay.
just a different type of valve.
Well, let's just, can we call them shut-off valves?
You can just call them valves.
Valves, okay. But that's what they do. They shut off the flow.
Correct. They segment the pipeline and allow us to isolate segments between the valves.
Did Dakota Access decide upon the placement of some or all of those 66 valves based on a review of the location of high consequence areas?
Yes, that's one of the factors that's involved in placing the valves.
And in your opinion, the valves are sufficient to isolate all of the high consequence areas in Iowa in the
Yeah.
event of a leak?
Yes.
Okay, is there a document or a map, public or confidential, in the record that shows the locations of the high consequence areas and the shut-off valves in Iowa?
I think we submitted a map that showed where the pipe bisected high consequence areas. I don't believe that map showed the valve locations on it, so we'll have to add the valve sites around those high consequence areas.
Is Dakota Access willing to do that?
On a confidential basis, yes, sir.
All right, thank you. Now, Ms. Sorensen and other parties in days past have asked questions about boring under the Mississippi River and installing a pipeline through tracts of trees or forest. Do you recall some of that discussion?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have in front of you what has been marked OCA here in Exhibit 1?
I do.
Your Honor, I believe all the parties should have a copy, and it's up on the screen. Mr. Fry, is this an example of a directional boring under a river or stream?
Yes, that's a good representation.
Okay. And is that generally, although obviously the size and scope would change depending upon the size of the water body, does that generally reflect how it's done or depicting how it's done?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, I would move to admit OCA hearing Exhibit 1.
No
Mr.
objection, Your Honor.
Dublinsky?
No objection.
It's in, OCA Hearing Exhibit 1 is admitted.
Thank you. Mr. Fry, would it be technologically possible to directionally bore under a stand of heavy timber?
Yes,
And I believe it was Mr. Tweedy who was testifying earlier in the week about some property that he owns that is heavily timbered. Do you recall that? Were you in the room when he testified?
yes, I was.
Do you know whether Dakota Access intends to directionally bore under Mr. Tweedy's property?
Yes, there is a water crossing on his property also, and Dakota Access does intend to bore under that property.
It does, yes. Yes, it does.
Correct, yes.
I'm sorry, I just didn't hear you. Would you agree that directionally boring under in that situation would preserve some of the aesthetics and reduce the loss of mature timber?
It will in those areas where we are doing a drill under heavily forested areas. We are going to limit the clearing above the pipeline to 30 foot in width for our future maintenance and patrols, rather than the 50 foot of width.
And there would be less, so there would be less disturbance overall.
There would be less timber removed.
Let me move on to a different issue that was raised earlier in the hearing. And that is in the event that, let me start again. At some point in the future, if this pipeline no longer needs to be used, would you agree that one option is to abandon it in place?
Yes, that would be one option.
In the event that would take place, does PHMSA or anyone else require that the pipeline, that the abandoned pipeline continue to be cathodically protected?
Well, I'm going to clarify something. Typically, what a company would do is they would place the pipeline in idle service. I mean, the pipeline is a valuable asset, and companies are unlikely to want to walk away from that asset. They would want to preserve it for future use, perhaps converted use. In that regard, the company maintains the cathodic protection, the right-of-way, does the inspections as if the pipeline were still in service.
Okay, let's move from that scenario to the scenario that the owner no longer wishes to preserve the property for future use. At that point, a pipeline owner is permitted to stop cathodic protection. Is that correct or incorrect?
I believe that is correct. There are, PHMSA does have some procedures that have to be followed to abandon a pipeline.
In the event cathodic protection is or ceases, and the pipeline begins to deteriorate, if a hole were to develop, what would happen to the soil surrounding the pipeline?
What would probably happen is the pipe would fill with water, and I'm kind of speculating here because I've been in the business for 35 years, and the companies I've worked with have never abandoned a pipeline, at least one that I had any responsibility for.
So one of the things that happens, you're saying, is But one of the things that could happen outside of your experience, obviously,
Mhm.
is that the pipeline could fill up with water.
Well, if it develops a hole and there's water in the ground, generally that water is going to, go into that conduit.
Well, what would happen to the soil surrounding that hole?
I don't know that anything would happen to the soil around it.
Would it flow into the pipeline?
If it were a large enough hole, I suppose it could.
Would closing the valves have any impact on material entering, or the amount of material or water that enters the pipeline?
I don't think so. Our valves are all going to be above grade.
Your Honor, that's all the question I have.
Ms. Jacobs?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, Mr. Fry.
Good evening.
I have several questions. Most are based on the testimony we heard either yesterday or now into today. So first, I'd like to go to your direct testimony, page 21, begin with line 10. And it really refers back to Exhibit 3 that you've provided.
Yes, ma'am.
In your testimony, you talk about the insurance agent addressing a concern about insurability for property which has a pipeline on it. And your Exhibit 3 is a letter from an agent, I believe it's an agent with Pekin Insurance, some representative of Pekin Insurance. If you could explain to us that letter, is it to be representative of what all insurance companies would do? Is it just what one would do? Help us understand the context around that.
I believe we addressed the question to Pekin because there was a representation from a landowner who I believe had this insurance company, and that they were either being denied or not being renewed or something, and so that's why we went directly to that insurance company.
But is it a representation by you that's potentially the same policy that we could see from other insurance companies, or?
I would expect it. Man, I've been doing this for 35 years, had thousands of miles of pipeline, responsibility for operations or engineering matter. I have never come across a situation where a landowner has come to us and said, I'm being denied insurance for my property because there's a pipeline on it. Yeah, I mean, I've never experienced it, never heard of it occurring with other pipelines.
And you say denied. Have you heard of landowners whose property insurance or whatever kind of insurance they have has gone up as a result of the pipeline, their premium payment?
Again, to my knowledge, no landowner has ever come to us and said, my premiums are being increased because of the presence of the pipeline.
Okay. All right, then we will switch gears a little bit from, I think there was some conversation yesterday about land mitigation, or mitigation, restoration. Some of the issues dealt with compaction. There was conversation about along the pipeline proposed route, the 30-foot, 50-foot, whatever, however far clearance. But what about any damage that could happen at the access points before you're actually where the working areas of the pipeline? So if there's not a road that could handle the heavy equipment and a farm road or something has to be used, would Dakota Access also provide restoration for any of those access points to the construction sites?
If we have an access easement and are utilizing that for the construction activity, then yes, we would reclaim or restore any of the land that we affected with our construction.
Okay. And then there's also quite a bit of conversation yesterday about tiles and various widths or depths. I believe you said you would repair the tile if it was damaged. Would that also include replacement if the tile had to be there, or are you truly just going to try to repair what's in
Well,
place?
it would, that would be an on-site determination by the tiling folks that we're going to hire to make recommendations. So it could include repair, it could include replacement. We'll obviously have to get to a point on the tile where the tile has integrity and we can make a seam between what we're replacing over the pipe and the tile that's outside that area.
Okay, so repair could include replacement.
Yes, ma'am.
Just wanted to verify that. Very good. Then some of these go to Mr. Mahmood, so I won't ask you those questions. Quite a couple of questions regarding conversation or communication with landowners. There was a comment made that landowners would get notification, I believe it's also in your testimony or somewhere else, 14 days prior to construction activity. Is
Yes,
that
ma'am.
correct? And then there was a comment made that notices to the county inspectors goes 24 hours before that begins?
We provide notice to county inspectors of any activity 24 hours in advance so they can make the determination of when they want to be on site to observe certain activities.
And you talk about observing, is there an ability for a landowner to review the site during the construction? Obviously, there's safety issues, I understand that, but.
Yes, we again generally do not want landowners or anyone else who's not directly involved with the construction activity to be on site because there is such a risk from so much heavy equipment, heavy material being handled in concert, and an individual who's not used to that may not be aware that they're standing in a place or somewhere where they may be in a blind spot of an operator or in an area where they can't be readily seen and they might be at risk. If there's any activity that the landowner has a particular concern about, we would want them to contact the agent, and then they could also talk to the construction manager, and we could try and find a way to accommodate their concerns.
But a landowner is not prohibited from inspecting the construction site at any time as long as the safety factors are taken into consideration.
He is the owner of the property, and when construction activity is not occurring, I mean, it is his property, but we would not want a landowner, again, for their own safety, to be in the vicinity of active construction.
Of active, but if it's the evening and everybody has gone home for the day, the landowner could walk around the construction area.
Again, they're the owner of the property, so as far as I know, they could.
Okay. And let me look here. Oh, and then my another question on the landowner is, in the final design plan, how is the landowner involved? Is that through strictly working with the land agent? Do they get to see the final drawings and renderings of what could occur on their property? Help me understand that involvement of the
Well,
landowner.
for the majority of the landowners, the drawings would simply be alignment sheets, which is kind of an aerial view of their property with the boundaries of the easement on it and showing where the ditch line would be, and then kind of a profile of the pipeline as it crosses their property. So there's not a lot to see, but they could look at those alignment sheets.
And take that maybe a step further, for those landowners who have done tiling in the vicinity, would those drawings also include a rendering of where the tiles are?
To the extent that the landowners have made the tiling information available, I don't know that that tile data would be on the alignment sheet. I'm not sure how the construction manager and project manager would take that information into account in their design, but we have been asking for that from all landowners. So to the extent we can, we know where it is, and we can make accommodations for the temporary measures that will be in place during construction to ensure we maintain the areas of the field outside of our construction activities still drain while we're doing construction.
All right, I think that takes care of my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Wagner?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Fry. You mentioned that the valves are currently located in, or designed to be located in the most ideal location. Is there any flexibility in that, or is it set in stone?
There is some flexibility. We look for, again, areas where there is access to the valve site, where we have power available for the valve site, where there is generally level ground. We don't want to be right where maybe a bend is in the line if we can avoid that. So those are some of the things we're looking for. We certainly, also one of the things is we prefer to have a voluntary easement. So we have discussions with landowners looking for landowners that are agreeable to consider having a valve on their property.
Okay, and then going back to the discussion about landowners being able to access the site, are you guys, is the construction under any, what I would consider typical construction sites like OSHA or a similar agency? Is there any of those safety measures that come into play, or does PHMSA handle
Well-
all of that?
Well, no. I mean, our contractor is subject to all the OSHA regulations. PHMSA doesn't supplant OSHA. So we need to comply with all applicable OSHA standards for underground construction. PHMSA is inspecting for things other than what OSHA inspects for. And then, of course, the county inspector is also there to make sure that we meet the requirements of our permit.
So that would also have a bearing on whether a landowner can just walk up to the construction site. It would be no different than me trying to walk into a building construction site. And
Well, yes, that, some of the OSHA requirements would be, your general obligation to make sure you keep people safe at any construction site.
right, is there any sort of training, or what level of training would a landowner need to go through before that you guys would
I don't really know. We haven't done it in that manner.
Okay.
The contractors are responsible for the training of their staff and the workers on the project. And then most of the people on the job that we have been doing this for many, many years.
Okay. And so in respect to, like we mentioned, the drain tile, whether it's temporary or permanent, will the landowners have an opportunity to see that either during, well, number one, during construction if it's temporary, and then the permanent repairs before they're covered up to make sure that they're satisfied with?
Yes, the landowners will have opportunity to inspect the permanent repairs, definitely, and they'll also have the opportunity to inspect or discuss with us the temporary repairs. We'll explain to them what we want to do to again, be able to drain those areas or maintain drainage on those areas that are outside the construction zone.
Okay. How long, can you give us an idea of given a distance and excluding boring and some of the other specific, but just going across general flat open terrain, about how much pipeline can be constructed in a certain amount of time? I'm looking for a rate of how quickly this will occur if it does.
Well, the activity maybe on a landowner's property, because you're coming in, doing different tasks at a time, and we could be on someone's property, up to 3 months.
Okay.
For when you first arrive to when you're finishing up. But that's because you've got different crews moving along, so you're at a different stage of construction activity on each individual property.
Okay. One of the other things, and I don't remember who the conversation was with, but there was something along the lines of whether or not the pipeline was going under roads, if it would be okay. And I think there was a 75,000 pound capacity, I think was the number. Was that the correct number?
We calculated based on a 75,000 pound axle load.
Okay. So and continue, I've been asking questions that have been brought up from our public comment meeting, so that we can get, because I thought they were valid questions and want to make sure that we get those answers. So can farm equipment, I would assume farm equipment would be able to go over the pipeline, and farming,
Yes, that's, as I stated, the engineering company that we've engaged in looking at this project, they contacted both Iowa State University and Oklahoma State University. And in discussions with those two universities is where they got the 75,000 pound axle load as a kind of a maximum to design to. And so we've determined that with a 4 foot of cover that equipment can cross in field or unpaved private roads, and the pipe is adequately protected.
okay, and so that would, I would assume, include a fully loaded grain semi. Am I getting, because I think in Iowa, our restriction is 80,000 pounds, but that may not be.
For an axle load?
I don't think it's axle, that's what I was going to
No.
ask. Is it per,
Yes.
I doubt that's per axle load. Is that for fully loaded truck? So it would depend on how many axles.
What we found is a 75,000 axle load would not be legal on any state roads. So
All right, so it's safe to assume that if a fully loaded grain, assuming they are following the Iowa DOT
correct.
laws, would be okay. All right. Continuing with the discussion that Mr. Pauly had with you about boring under Mr. Tweedy's property, did I hear correctly that there would still be a 30-foot path cleared directly over the pipeline?
Yes, there will.
Okay, is there a reason to clear that if the access is not needed? Or or could it be cleared at the certain time when access was needed?
We're required to regularly inspect the pipeline right-of-way. That's done on an aerial manner, and so for that to be effective, you have to have a line of sight to the ground.
Okay,
And 30 foot is about the minimum width you can have that allows a line of sight to the ground.
okay. And Ms. Sorensen was asking about the boring material, and you said it's water and bentonite. Is there anything else included in there?
There should not be.
Okay, and what is bentonite?
It's clay, a type of clay.
Okay. And so is that, I'm trying to just kind of relate to what that would be like. Is that similar to what maybe many of us have seen driving in our neighborhoods when they're doing new natural gas lines, or other than the yellow machines where a guy's sitting there and there's a thing? Is that the similar, which on a smaller
At a very
scale, I
different
assume?
scale, yes. They're probably putting in kind of small diameter plastic distribution
Right.
lines to individual homes. It's this, I guess, a similar concept
Okay.
at a very different scale.
Okay. And then the cathodic protection, is that needed all the time, even in a unused pipeline?
Yes.
Or is it, okay. I believe that's all my questions. Thank you.
So I'm going to return to Mr. Tweedy for a second. Are you aware of any exceptions that have ever been allowed by PHMSA to require on-site versus aerial, so that you did not have to clear the area in forested areas?
I don't know. It's not a question that I've ever been involved in asking, and I'm not aware. I just don't know. I'm not aware of such a circumstance.
Do you have any involvement with any of the permitting in general, the number of permits that are required?
I do not have much involvement in the permitting applications. That's primarily Ms. Howard and her group.
in your exhibit, CAF 4, on the back, it has, I'm on page 19 of 43. It has the additional workspace justification requests. Are all of these properties ones for which you do not have an easement, a voluntary easement?
I don't believe that's the case. I think this was to show all of the areas where we needed additional workspace.
Is there an updated that just has those that that the request would be for eminent domain?
I don't know that we have such a list prepared, but if we don't, we can prepare it.
Your Honor, if I can clarify on that, I believe that is the list of those properties that needed additional workspace that were not subject to voluntary easement at the time that was created. If Your Honor wants one with the parcels that have subsequently been withdrawn, removed, we can provide that.
That would be helpful. I think though that, because I was looking for Mr. Tweedy's property because I was thinking that it wasn't, but you said it's no longer 50, it's 30. You don't need the additional workspace because the drilling machine isn't going to be on his property, or that's not the appropriate terminology, but it was better than the mini sewer pipe. Is that why there's no additional space on Mr. Tweedy, is because that's on one of the voluntary that's on either side of him? Do you know?
I don't know.
Okay. And then my last question is, twice you've made a statement that Iowa State or some of the other state universities have been involved with consulting or providing advice. Are there any documents from any of the state universities on the advice that they've provided?
What the advice they provided or the information they provided was our folks contacted them to make sure that they did calculations based on the heaviest farm equipment that we would reasonably expect to see. And so they, as far as I know, they didn't provide any other advice. They just provided information about the axle weight of farm equipment.
So if I had written down that you said consulting, would that have been correct? That's the consulting they provided to tell you the weight of farm equipment?
I guess they answered questions. I don't know if you would consider that consulting or not.
Mr. Dublinsky.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Fry, I just have a couple of quick follow-ups. First of all, I want to test your memory here and go back to the very beginning of your cross-examination. You and Mr. Taylor were talking about different construction standards and the standards in the AIMP. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And the two of you had a discussion about whether there would be any independent enforcement of that. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Are you familiar with the Chapter 9 and Chapter 13 rules of the board that will govern this pipeline?
Yes.
And is it your understanding that county inspectors have that role?
Yes.
You had a conversation about your experience or ETP's experience crossing the Mississippi River. Do you recall that? Just today.
Oh, today,
today,
yes,
yeah.
today I do.
Do you know, you were talking about the length of time. Do you know how long it took Energy Transfer to drill the Fayette Express under the Mississippi?
Actually, I do not.
There's been a lot of conversation about valves, and I just want to, from several people, I originally had it marked down from a conversation you had with Mr. Prey, but obviously you've had a lot of those. Now let me just go through a couple sort of recaps on the valve issue, how many valves in total will there be in Iowa?
There'll be 66 locations where we can segment the pipe, and 62 of those sites will be standalone mainline valve sites.
Okay. And you've had some conversations about how those are located. You went through a list of those factors just a little while ago, correct?
Yes,
And one way those are cited is to isolate HCAs, correct?
yes.
And how many of those, the 66 valve sites, have already been secured by voluntary easement?
It's between 40 and 50.
And does that, as you locate those, do those impact where the subsequent valve in the line would have to go?
They can, because we look at spill modeling. It's an iterative process. We're looking at the topography, and so if you move one valve, it may affect where you want to site other valves.
And I believe you've said that all 66 valves would be capable of remote actuation, correct?
That's correct.
Is there any regulation that requires you to do that?
There is none. There's requirements for valves. There is no requirement for valves to be remotely actuated.
And that's all I have, Your Honor.
Valves to be remotely actuated.
And that's all I have, Your Honor.
Mr. Fry, you're excused.
Thank you very much.
We will be taking a 30-minute break to receive nourishment. I want to have the mic switched and swear, actually, he doesn't need the mic. I just want to get the witness sworn in and start with the testimony. Mr. Dublinsky, once we've done that, I have a question for you. Where is the witness?
Your Honor, Dakota Access would call Kenneth Johnson. It's been so long since we had an entirely new witness, I had sort of forgotten the drill.
We'll get the mic after we break. Hello, Mr. Johnson. Please raise your right arm. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? You may be seated. Mr. Dublinsky? Oh,
Pass
is
the,
Miss Agrimonte?
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Johnson. Did you cause to be filed testimony in this matter? And did you also adopt certain testimony filed by Mr. Hoyer?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
I can. Did you also adopt portions of Mr. Hoyer's testimony?
Yes.
Do you have any corrections to make to your testimony today?
Yes, there are some corrections.
All right, let me see if I can get those up for you. All right, let's look at page 2, line 3. Did you want to delete the word was? Your Honor, would you like me to take a moment to let Mr. Johnson put his microphone on?
No, I forgot about this part. So we'll come back to this after break because I'm not ready.
No problem.
For corrections. Mr. Dublinsky. The board has been having conversations in regards to Howard Exhibit MH4, which was provided to us in response to requests for all permits needed for the pipeline and the status of those permits. You then, a moment ago, brought up the fact that our administrative rules allow or authorize the county inspector to be part of that oversight process. We believe from Mr. Flo's testimony that it appears Dakota Access will need county and state permits to cross waterways other than those listed on MH4, and there are other permits. Can you verify that MH4 lists all of the permits needed for construction of the pipeline, or provide us with a list of all other permits or authorizations needed by Dakota Access, federal, state, or county, before Dakota Access can construct the pipeline?
Your Honor, we will discuss that at the break, and we will let you know.
That's why I brought it up now.
Thank you.
Are there any other issues before we break? Mr. Polly?
Yes, Your Honor. I have one housekeeping item I think I'd like to finish up so I don't forget. During the cross-examination of OCA witness Bodine, there was reference to a document which evidences some sort of parental guarantees, and we will file that tomorrow with the board's electronic filing system. But I wanted to make sure that the parties were aware we are going to call that OCA Hearing Exhibit 2, and we will file that confidentially to give Dakota Access the opportunity to file the necessary confidentiality paperwork. And we will have copies on Monday for the parties.
You know, we're already, the board has determined that that is a confidential document.
Okay.
So we don't want to do an order.
Okay, well, that's fine. We will file it confidentially, and we will have copies available Monday morning for the parties who have signed confidentiality agreements.
Perfect. Is there any other housekeeping issues before we go to supper, dinner, whatever anyone calls it?
Yes,
Ms.
Madam Chair,
Sorensen.
I'd like to have the exhibit that was the Canadian regulator Halls Trans-Canada pipeline, the last one, with Mr. Fry, admitted as a hearing exhibit 1 for Sorensen.
So I have Sorensen hearing exhibit 5. Is there any objection?
Well, no, it's 1. I had thought things were going to go differently.
There's absolutely several objections, Your Honor, and we would have objected at the time, but she moved on immediately, and which is part of the objection now. There were no questions about it. It involves a natural gas pipeline from a different company in a different country in front of a different regulatory board. There is no foundation for that. It wasn't actually used with the witness for any of its substance. There's no indication it relates in any way to our project. We definitely would object.
In both instances, it involved drilling fluid, and that was what I was trying to establish, and we did discuss drilling fluid.
I would agree with you. We did discuss drilling fluid. I'll get back to you after our break.
Thank you.
Your Honor, I guess there's been a lot of leniency about allowing a lot of articles in. I understand that's generally how the board process is, but we would be happy to show up next week with a busload of pro-pipeline news source articles if that's how this is going to go.
Mr. Dublinsky, the 3 exhibits that I did not
Ms.
enter.
Sorensen, you need to direct your comments to me.
Okay, Madam Chair, there were 3 exhibits that I did not enter or did not attempt to enter, all dealing with data requests that were not answered in a complete and timely manner, and I chose not to enter them.
And Ms. Sorensen, I understand that, and the board does give a great deal of leeway in most circumstances as it relates to evidence that's submitted. But there has to be some standard, which is why I want to discuss this with the other 2 board members, and I am not going to rule on it until I've done that. Are there any other issues? We will now be back at 6:20.
take our land at a low cost so they can build a race course hazardous waste pipeline diagonally across our state? Give me a break.
If I can jump in here, did you have a question, sir?
Yes, I did.
Okay, you've been standing, so you go, and then you had a hand up.
My name is Steve Patterson. I'm from Marion. I rode up here today and Mark's very comfortable in my car. So I appreciate that. Also, Mr. Van Zandt, right? I appreciate your remark before you turned it to the floor because I thought there was something kind of missing here that you explained why. But I'm still going to make a point on that. And that is this. I appreciate that we have two unions in here. I grew up in a union family. My dad was a Republican member of the Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. And someone told me the other day, that's kind of an oxymoron. But back when he was in the unions in the 50s and early 60s, it really wasn't. They were the moderates at that time. Now, here's my point. I appreciate the fact that we have two union men, one with the railroad, advocating for the railroad, one from the pipe fitters, advocating for the pipe fitters. I would have liked, and I know this will probably come up later, and this is mostly about the pipeline, but I would have liked either one of them to say, even though I'm representing the view of my union and myself, I realize I'm representing what I consider to be the best of two really bad ideas. And the best way we could do is to get rid of that transportation of oil across Iowa.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. That's sort of my point. I wasn't really advocating necessarily for fossil fuel transportation by rail. In fact, I think it's a horrible idea and we need to turn the corner and pursue renewable energy. So I'm not advocating for the railroad, and I think that's a very good point. Also, to Andy's credit, these are careers that he's talking about, but just as the other person who laid out the case before us, we can have careers that build things in Iowa that leave a legacy that create continued renewable energy and continued renewable jobs in Iowa. And I think the renewable power is the way to do that. And when we pursue fossil fuel infrastructure, it takes away from the ability and the necessity to do that.
Andy, did you want to respond?
Well, I wanted to really respond back to the first gentleman's, and I think it's great, the energy car and the wind. We are in the process right now, of course, of working in the Marshalltown Powerhouse. We have members up there right now that's actually putting in two new natural gas boilers up there. Also, we're also doing the job at Iowa State University by replacing, from trying to get less reliable on coal and going to natural gas also at Iowa State University. Both jobs are going on currently right now. But at the same sense, in some of the jobs that I worked in the industry side anyway, is they're not going to be able to run ADM off a wind machine yet. That's just a fact. They're not going to be able to run the Cargill plants. I'm all for trying to find something different, but it's in the evolving state of that right now. And I hope that we do find an opportunity or have that opportunity someday to actually use wind or solar, which I've actually, believe it or not, taken some classes on solar to get more acquainted with it and learning about it. And I appreciate it, the future that it does bring. And I thank you for your comments.
We're getting more and more people. You were up next.
Full disclosure, I'm a retired electrician, IBEW, worked with UA all my life. By the way, I accept what he says about the professionalism of his fitter welders. The pipeline they put in will be as close to flawless as possible. These people know what they're doing. And also about temporary jobs versus permanent, that's kind of silly. Like lawyers, construction workers spend their whole life doing just one job and then move to another. You know, I spent 40 years doing temporary work. But I want to point out to Andy that, you know, I'm in favor of building the clean line. I'm not in favor of the pipeline. So, of course, he's an electrician. His guys are going to build. No, it goes beyond that. you're either a climate change denier or you're not. If you accept that we have a climate change problem, if that goes unchecked and we end up having the drought that's now in California move clear to the Mississippi River, your people in Local 33 are going to be hurting too. We all are. So it goes beyond trying to get a little work in the short run. And another thing for Mr. Gross, I hope you stop this, but I prefer you stop it by something other than eroding eminent domain rights. Because in the challenges we're going to have in the future, we're going to have a lot of situations where we may need to use eminent domain and may have to have a fairly liberal interpretation of who gets to use it. And we might be shooting ourselves in the foot if we put restrictions in now.
Sir, I think you were next.
Yeah, thank you. Question for Dr. Gross. Really eloquent. You made a great case, and had I not already been convinced that you were right before, you would have convinced me. You didn't talk about climate change, though, as people came down along the line. I understand you're doing eminent domain, and that may not work as well, but how do you look at that issue as well?
First of all, with regard to, and you make a good point. First of all, with regard to the eminent domain, the language that is being restricted and put in the code would relate only to crude oil pipelines, so it's not broader than that. There are significant public uses where it maybe makes sense, but as I said earlier, in a situation where you're effectively building a hazardous waste line through the state diagonal with no on-ramps or off-ramps, it's hard for me to justify public use of necessity in eminent domain. With regard to your question on climate change, I guess that's more of a personal question than one with regard to our organization, because our organization hasn't taken a specific position with regard to that, but I'm happy to talk about it personally if that's useful or even valuable in any way. Obviously, our climate is changing. And obviously, the state of Iowa can benefit from responding to that in a positive way. I remember working with you way back in the early 1980s to put renewable and standards in place for the state of Iowa, one of the first ones to do that. And clearly, you look across the state of Iowa, that's benefited us. How can anyone deny that renewable fuel will not benefit a state that has more biomass than any other place in the country? It has all kinds of potential for turning that into power. So that's one of the reasons why I think that this proposed crude oil pipeline doesn't meet the necessity of the business ethics standard I laid out earlier, which is if you're going to really increase incomes and jobs in the state of Iowa, renewables are where it's at, not just from a climate change standpoint, but from an economic standpoint, because we have the ability to produce so much of that. And if in fact climate change, which I don't think anybody can deny is occurring, or at least if they read and study and analyze, realize is occurring, understand that if we can reduce our carbon footprint and improve our use of renewables, we're going to benefit that as well. That's just an extra plus.
But let me, if I can, just briefly, a comment on eminent domain. I'm sorry. On eminent domain. It's for a public use, but there can be situations, and I've seen more than my share, where even though it's for what could be called a public use, it's being used in a way that may impact the environment unnecessarily. For example, they might choose a route for a highway or choose a route for a pipeline that even though that pipeline or that highway might serve people in Iowa, might be a public use generally, there's a better alternative route that wouldn't impact the environment or wouldn't impact the people's lives as much. So that's what we need to think about when we think about eminent domain.
I want to take a moment and go back to this climate change discussion because I'm very excited to see that that is a lot of the things that are being discussed right now, the underlying driver. Because recently I saw a poll that said less than 50% of people thought it was an issue. And that's very concerning. That was just a public poll, obviously it might have been biased. But it's just concerning to me given the scientific evidence we see with climate change. However, with a lot of people talking about oil being bad and imposing these things on oil, one thing you have to remember from an economist perspective is technology selection is one of the more inefficient policies that we see. So picking and choosing different types of energy and imposing things on them is not necessarily what economists prefer. If we're serious about climate change, one of the most efficient things would be a carbon tax, something of that nature. So if this is a discussion that you guys feel very adamant about, that is something I think that you guys should spend some effort looking into, discussing, or talking to your policymakers, because then that would, through the market system, work. It would punish all of the people using heavy carbon-based sources, but also then benefit the people who are doing clean energy by not imposing any cost onto them. So I just want to put that out there, since a lot of you seem to be thinking about that. I think that's the point of view should come from a climate perspective, is what's a bigger policy picture than just picking and choosing?
Sir, you were up next, ma'am, and then.
Hi, I'm Bill Gerhardt, and I was up here. I was just going to listen today, but I feel compelled to say something since the first panelist mentioned two organizations I have dear to me. I'm a member of LINO, and that stands for the Laborers International Union of North America. We're construction laborers. We build things, we build buildings, we build highways, we do asphalt work, we do sewer pipe work, we remove asbestos, we remove lead, and we do pipeline work. We do distribution work, which is getting that pipe that has natural gas up to your house. We do that. We do mainline pipeline work. And secondly, I'm the president of Iowa State Building Trades, and you mentioned the building trades. The building trades is the umbrella organization for 17 different unions that perform construction work. Includes the IBW, the plumbers and fitters, the carpenters, cement finishers, elevator constructors, sheet metal workers, painters, roofers, on down the line. And like I said, I was going to listen today, but my mind is sort of made up. And I'll tell you why I'm supporting the pipeline. One, it's jobs. It's the $2,000 to $4,000 jobs, and those aren't over-exaggerated at all. I've been around pipelines my whole life. I know how many manpower, how many man-hours they take. That's a reasonable estimate. Two, safety. We have 40,000 miles of pipeline running across the state now, and you very seldom hear about a leak. Just in the last 2 months, we've had 2 train derailments carrying fuel. One, the train was going 25 miles an hour and it tipped over and landed in the Mississippi River south of Galena and started a big fire. In 2008, in a year's time, there were 10,000 rail cars of crude oil moving across the country. Last year, there were 300,000. Next year, there'll be 500,000. So unless we can put a safe pipeline in, it's going to be moved by rail, and you're going to see a lot more damage than you would. And I know Andy, and I know Andy's guys, and I know that these pipelines will be put in the highest quality of safety. And to answer your question, we have the manpower in Iowa to do it. The crafts that work on the pipelines have training funds, have apprentice programs. They're gearing up now to do this. So those are going to be Iowa jobs. And last, you mentioned President Carter. I mean, there's some of us here that actually were around when President Carter was here. But I remember OPEC had their foot on our throats with energy. We couldn't even turn down the Christmas tree lights. We had to drive 55 miles an hour. Doug, you probably don't remember that. You were young. 55 miles an hour.
How old do you think I am?
But isn't it nice to think we can be energy independent? I've got an 18-year-old son and a 15-year-old son. I don't want to go over to the Mideast to fight for oil, because that's where we're getting it now. We have an opportunity to really be energy independent. And I believe there's going to be a transition period. We're going to move on to the next step in energy. And I'm glad when we do, but until we do, we need this pipeline. So I'm in support of it, and I applaud you for holding this conference.
These are the people doing it. We only have about 5 minutes left. And I've got several people. Ma'am, if you could.
Thank you. I'm Kathy B. I'm an energy educator, and I'm just so glad that I was able to come down and go over the speech. And also, Andy, yes, I agree. We still need oil. You don't go cold turkey on an addiction like this. So, yes, we need oil. I'm happy to say I also drive a car that runs on sunshine, but mine's a Chevy Bolt. After I run out of my electricity, I have gas backup. So yes, we still need oil. But why don't we have local oil? Where is all of our gas coming from? Why can't we have a local refinery? And We've already said we've got pipelines there. Why do we need a new pipeline? Because they want to move unprocessed oil. And that unprocessed oil is why it is such a danger on railroad cars. It is so flammable because it contains so many of these gases that are, actually, the vibration of the railroad cars shakes them up, takes them to the top, and there's your explosive mix right there. So why don't we have local refineries, permanent jobs, and then we can use the oil line we've already done. So that's my question.
The last refinery built in the United States was in 1978. There was a proposal for Elk Point, South Dakota to put a new refinery in at one point. Hyperion was the name of the job. They called it the Gorilla Project. Something we stood behind very firm to try to create. It was a $10 billion refinery. Something that actually started to get through the permit process, but pretty much bogged down in the later stages of it. The land rights were no longer signed, and as far as I know, any new refineries out there, I have not heard of any of recent.
Ma'am, you were up next.
Thanks. I'm actually a professor here at UNI. I just saw this advertised and I thought it was interesting. And I am interested to learn more, and I think the speakers are speaking. This is pointed more towards Dr. Roseberg. I'm interested in these questions of ethics and divestment and investment, right? So behind the scenes kinds of money and how big institutions and the state that have endowments, maybe we don't have much of an endowment, but certainly institutions or municipalities or whatever that actually invest in companies, so might be investing in big oil or whatever. That's another way to take away power, right? And so it's not just a carbon tax, but it's also a way that we as a community, and it can be the UNI community, it could be an ISU community, it could be University of Iowa community, that we specifically say, we are no longer investing in this company. We don't want to be a shareholder. We don't want that profit, okay? Because everything's driven by profit. On that, you know, the lawyer spoke very eloquently about the profit orientation of that company coming through. And I'm just wondering if you can speak to how we as concerned community members, as parts of institutions, and taxpayers too, not only call for carbon taxes, but also for divestment from those kinds of funding sources, or from those companies. And so here too, I would love to see you and I say, no, we're not going to put any money towards that. And instead actually put any kinds of capital towards these transitional projects. So if you
Yes.
could comment on that, I'd appreciate it.
No, I'll try my best to answer your question. Please let me know if it's not sufficient. We can talk after. So you're talking about the political economy. That's, you know, this is a hard question to answer because yes, there's different scales. This is a very large scale project and it's going to make a strong economic impact, at least in the short run. A lot of these grassroots projects or these stances in the politics that you're talking about, the trouble with trying to push those is that they're small scale. And it takes a lot of small scale things and it will build up. But when people want to see action now and they want to see changes, they tend to move towards these bigger projects. Now, I'm not saying that that doesn't mean that these things collectively wouldn't make an impact on the economics, but when you look at the large scale players in the energy, they're not necessarily considering these small movements to affect them. They see that, but it kind of, in my point of view, from my experience and looking at their actions, they don't take that as seriously as big movements like proposals of the size we're talking about today. So I do think that they play a role. Mark said earlier, I believe your name's Mark, about your in-home choices. Those are great options for people to use. Unfortunately, it's hard to expand those out to the entire population. You can't expect everybody to adopt that because it is a costly investment. And I applaud you for doing that and making that choice in your home. And there are ways of explaining to people that this may pay off in the long run. But you are dealing with a broad range of income distribution where those choices to them do not pay off soon enough or don't pay off at all for them because of the bracket that they are in. So I appreciate the efforts that are made at the small scale. I'm involved in some of those because I believe, as I said earlier, everybody has different valuations. And my valuations do consist of pushing these smaller scale things in the hopes that it will definitely make its way through. But I think it's hard from an economist, when I step back as an economist and think about policies, I kind of focus on the bigger picture, knowing what is driving the decisions of these big companies. It's not necessarily keeping in line with what these smaller movements are doing. But we can discuss afterwards if you want. I do applaud those movements and I'm a part of them. But at the same time, from an economist perspective, I see the bigger policies like a carbon tax making a bigger impact.
Let me just say real quick, if somebody questioned whether or not I knew who Jimmy Carter was, but I was actually the head of the fuels division of the Iowa Energy Policy Council when Jimmy Carter was president and had to allocate fuel around the state of Iowa. But I remember back then we had a solar division, we had an alternative fuels division, and everybody thought we were wacko. But I'm just telling you, today, what makes the difference is those technologies are on the cusp of being economically viable. In fact, they are economically viable. The revolution is occurring. It's occurring today. I don't even know that you need a carbon tax to promote it any further because it's already there. And so you got to question whether or not we would, from an energy policy standpoint, take the action associated with this crude oil pipeline, whether or not that makes long-term energy and economic sense, given the revolution that's already occurring.
Let me step in there. We're actually a little bit over time-wise, so I think we're going to, if you guys are open to it, may I encourage the audience to corner you during the coffee break and talk. So coffee, water is available in the back of the room. Thank you all for your participation. And let's give our panelists. Thank you. Nice meeting you.
We're just doing some surveying, 2 creeks here. I was told to give you a card if you guys show up.
Coastal GasLink.
Yeah.
Trans-Canada.
Yeah.
So you guys know you guys don't have permission to be here, right?
I'm not
This
aware
is
of anything.
traditional
I'm just here as
predatory
safety. If you would like
Flintstone
us to leave,
territory.
we'll leave.
No, Trans-Canada has already been warned, right? Equipment will be confiscated if you guys return.
The pipelines are trying to go right through where the salmon spawn, and that's where we decided to put the action camp in. Last year we put a cabin right smack in the way of the pipeline so that they would not go through, and we just recently, last year, we fenced it off because we saw ribbons in there for drill pads for them to start do test drills so they can drill a pipe right under the river there. We've been hearing all the media of all these pipes breaking and waterways getting damaged, and we just not gonna accept that risk because we don't want to be 25 years, 10 years down the road telling our kids, oh, we used to hunt moose here and we used to fish.
We've never ceded or surrendered our lands to anybody here. There's no treaty. There's no relationship built with any government in the past. None of our people signed anything to let them make decisions on our territories.
Tomorrow morning at 3, we may see some trucks attempting to get through to log the right-of-way. We're going to have to differentiate them. So we're going to go through all the peaceful avenues we can. But a way of a warrior is you go through, expend all peaceful avenues first, and when all those fail, it's war. That is the way of the warrior.
All the food in front of me. We're worried we put this cabin right en route of the PTP and Enbridge pipeline, the GPS route. That's where this cabin sits now, and they have now since moved it upstream about 5 kilometers.
From
6.
no, it's a half a kilometer to 2 kilometers away. By way of them actually amending their project and changing the location of the crossing, we decided to start building more infrastructure in their way again. So we did a call out for people to come out and assist us in the construction of a pit house. And the pit house went directly in the path of the Pacific Trails pipeline, deliberately because Pacific Trails was farther along than the rest of the pipelines in their permitting processes.
This is the blockader's dream. Those who've been doing this for a while. Yeah, some people build platforms and sleeping dragons. I build a whole fucking, I build a blockade. It's not just a blockade, it's also a living, it's a real dwelling. This is a part of the decolonization.
For housekeeping measures, I have an objection to Sorensen Exhibit 1. I am sustaining the objection, not allowing the testimony. Ms. Sorensen, or the exhibit, excuse me. Ms. Sorensen, I would like to state that you were able to ask your question related to the article. We are just not admitting the article. Okay. Ms. Agramante, are you ready? Oh,
Did you
Mr. Dublinsky? You guys are confusing me.
Well, no,
Who's-
you had asked me to a question before we broke, and I was
yes.
happy to report back, if you'd like.
Yes.
Now, because this came up in the context of Ms. Howard, we took that to be environmental permits, and so this is an update on the status of all of the environmental permits. I can tell you that there actually is not much that isn't on there by category, but it would be a lot listed individually, and that is roads, county and DOT, and I can tell you that we have agreement from DOT subject to, for all DOT jurisdictional roads, subject to this board granting the permit. All of the counties, which again are just permits, have told us that talk to them after we get our permit. So it's sort of the flip side of the DOT. The other one that arguably isn't, although we don't think of it as a permit, is the drainage districts, but those are actually easements, not permits. And am I forgetting anything else? I'm looking for, what's that? Yeah, railroads are also a license, it's a land issue. So we think that the only thing that is missing here in terms of Iowa jurisdiction permits are the county and the DOT. And those are just for the roads. And again, I mean, we can put, those would be a category. We wouldn't want to list them for every road necessarily, but categorically, that's what's not on here. Does that answer your question, Your Honor?
Yes, and we're attempting to, after listening to testimony, we're attempting to try and figure out if we have the documents that we require and where some of the testimony relates back to an actual permit, if we know what that permit is. So you take Ms. Howard's testimony, we're looking at some of those responses and trying to figure out where some of the language is coming from, and that's why we're asking.
Okay. And Your
Mr.
Honor,
Dublinsky, I want to verify with you that you are stating to us that there are no county or state permits to cross waterways that you've not provided to us.
my understanding, and Ms. Howard would know better, but my understanding is that the small sort of county waterways, they're in counties, we do not need any sort of permit other than land access, that the only permits we need for waterways are either sovereign land permits or core approval. Is that?
Yes, Mr. Wagner, you may.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I said.
Mr. Wagner has a question for you.
There was alluding to, and I can't remember who was asking the question about county roads having permission from the county to cross those roads. Is that?
That is correct. That's what I was talking about earlier on the roads. There are two types of road permits. There's DOT, which actually sort of, to get ahead here, we pre-filed, it will be a Mahmood Exhibit 3, which is the email from the DOT saying those are all approved, subject to the permit from this board. Board Member Wagner, what you're referring to, the county, each county has a sort of a permit form, and we've talked with them, and what they've told us is come back for that after you have your IUB permit. And those will be, the permit will be a county-wide permit from the engineer.
The continuation of that struggle then is you have the questions that are coming in on the county inspectors and how they know for site-specific issues that landowners raise that county inspector's aware of it or that it's been brought up in that permitting. And so we're struggling with it with chasing the process to make sure that we have everything in order.
Yeah, and the only thing that the county would have there is the roads, and possibly, again, not on a permit basis necessarily, it would be the drainage district, but for the landowner and the county inspector, what the county inspector is, and I don't want to go too far into this, it's sort of an analysis of the Chapter 9 rules, isn't necessarily permit conditions, because they're going to be, for the most part, on private property. What they're going to be talking about are sort of the AIMP issues and any specific construction agreements that are made as part of the easement, but mostly AIMP issues.
And I'm not going to try and push you further down that route, but I think that the board does have concerns about the county inspectors and making sure that the landowners, if you were to receive a permit, and then what that process is for those landowners for the next step, which our next witnesses obviously are going to be addressing. So that's why we bring it up.
Okay.
Thank you. Ms. Agramante?
Thank you, Your Honor. If you don't mind, I'm just going to take two. Mr. Johnson, when you submitted testimony in this case, did you have a different title at that time?
I did. I was the right-of-way supervisor for a portion of the state. Now I am the right-of-way manager for the entire state.
You submitted reply testimony, and then you also adopted testimony of Mr. Hoyer. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that would be specifically part of his direct and part of his supplemental direct?
That is correct.
I have one update question to ask you regarding your testimony. On page 6, you provide some information in response to a board staff report about 4 landowners. Do you have an update for the landowner Marjorie Buechler?
Oh, I do. Actually, the Buechler tract signed a voluntary easement.
All right, and then did you have several technical corrections you wanted to make to your reply testimony?
I do.
The first one I have is page 2, line 3, to delete the word was. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right, next one is page 3, line 16. You have a list there. Did you want to add something to that list?
Yes, the actual calculation sheet for the offer.
All right, is that calculation worksheet?
Correct.
All right, and the last correction I have for you is page 22, lines 6 and 7. And I have that you wanted to delete the word contradicts and replace it with something.
One moment.
Mr. Johnson,
Well,
maybe?
yes, that is not consistent with.
All right, so you wanted to replace contradicts with, quote, is not inconsistent with, unquote?
Is not consistent with, is not consistent with.
Your way, not mine.
Thank you.
Thank you. This witness is tendered for cross. Yeah,
Ms.
go ahead.
Agramante, just for the benefit of everyone listening, could you again restate what pages of Hoyer's direct and supplemental Mr. Johnson will be adopting?
I can. Direct, page 6, line 18 to page 8, line 14. And then Mr. Hoyer's supplemental direct, page 8, lines 1 through 7.
Can I have those again? Sorry, can I have those restated again?
Yes, can I restate them to make sure that I have it? Hoyer pages on direct, page 6, line 18 through page 8, line 14.
Yes.
And supplemental, page 8, lines 1 through 7.
That's correct, Your Honor.
Which supplemental?
The supplemental direct of Mr. Hoyer.
There's 2 of them.
There's a reply, and
Yeah,
none
there's-
of the reply is being adopted by Mr. Johnson. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
With those preliminaries, Mr. Johnson is tendered for cross-examination.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor?
No questions.
Mr. Murray?
Madam Chair, I'd like to give the technology desk the areas I'm going to be accessing. I didn't have an opportunity to do that.
We got you too quickly, didn't we?
Well,
Yeah.
you're going fast. Thank you. Mr. Johnson, I've seen you in the hallway here in the last few days. I'm for the Northwest Iowa Landowners Association, and I have a few questions for you, okay?
Okay.
With respect to Mr. Hoyer, who had previously provided direct testimony, a part of which you're adopting, what was his title? Do you remember?
His title is right-of-way manager, but he's directly with the client company, ETP.
And your title is, again, what?
Mine is also right-of-way manager, except I report to Rick Hoyer, and but I work for contract land staff.
Okay, so you're a contractor for whom?
Dakota Access.
Okay, so contract land staff is a contractor for Dakota Access, right?
Correct.
Okay. Yesterday, Mr. Fry testified that there were 320 parcels that were held out. Would you have information as to the number of holdouts?
Held out, what's the term?
Yeah, it's a good point. Easements that are not signed up yet. Would you have any information on totals?
320 is approximately correct. It's within the ballpark.
Okay, and the specific question I had was, how many miles would those holdouts constitute?
I don't know that answer.
Is there a way Dakota Access could generate a report that tells us how many miles are held out?
You would have to talk to Dakota Access about how they would, and if they could calculate that.
Okay. This is a generalization, and I believe from the testimony you're adopting and not adopting that you're not adopting any of the testimony for Hoyer on valves, correct?
Correct.
That would be Mahmood, right?
I believe that's correct.
Okay. With respect to the issue of gates and fences and locks and keys, would that also be Mahmood?
Correct.
Oh, good. Am I correct that Dakota Access they've authorized a number of right-of-way agents in order to secure easements over the past year? Would that be correct?
Authorized?
Yes.
What do you mean by authorized?
I'm going to put it to you that way and ask you to answer it the best way you can.
If you mean if you mean.
Your Honor, I'm going to object. I'm sorry, I should have objected to the question. The witness said he didn't understand what authorization meant, and now he's trying to guess. So I'm going to object to the question.
Mr. Murray, I missed the question, so I need either you or the court reporter to restate it.
I can read it again.
Would you please do that for me?
Sure. Am I correct that Dakota Access has authorized a number of right-of-way agents in efforts to secure easements from landowners in Iowa? Did you need it again? Sorry. Am I correct that Dakota Access has authorized a number of right-of-way agents in efforts to secure easements from landowners in Iowa?
Ms.
I know who you're talking to. It's okay. My objection was that the previous response, there was an interchange with Mr. Murray, and the witness did not understand what the word authorized meant. And Mr. Murray said, "Well, just do the best you can." And then Mr. Johnson tried to answer, and I realized I should have interposed an objection earlier. I'm trying to do that now.
And do you still want Mr. Murray to explain authorized in further detail?
I do, Your Honor.
Do you want me to do it?
Yes.
Okay. We probably need to break it down. The company you work for is who?
Contract land staff.
And these right-of-way agents I'm going to talk about, are they employed by your company?
Yes.
Are all the right-of-way agents that were used in connection with the Dakota Access pipeline, are all those right-of-way agents employed by your company?
No.
Okay. What companies were involved in the right-of-way, in hiring right-of-way agents, if you could identify them?
They're contract land staff, and I don't exactly know the full name of the other company other than Mustang is how we refer to them.
Okay, so there were two right-of-way contract companies providing land agents, right?
Correct.
Okay. And you worked with contract land staff.
That is correct.
Do you have knowledge as to what went on in, we'll call it Mustang?
What do you mean by what went on?
With respect to right-of-way agent negotiations.
Yes, they're still supervised. As the supervisor, we have two supervisors, and as a supervisor, I did supervise the Mustang, one of the Mustang personnel. So I still had supervision over the person.
Okay, so was there how many persons were agents within Mustang total?
One.
Okay, just one. All right. So with respect to those agents, did Dakota Access have control over what those agents did in negotiating with landowners?
Dakota Access had authority. I would use the word more of authority.
Over the way right-of-way agents were to work with landowners, correct?
Correct.
Okay. As I understand it, these agents were assigned to communicate with a certain respective set of landowners assigned to each of them. Would that be a general?
Generally, yes.
Okay. Now, I want you to, I'm going to refer you to your own testimony, page 14. Excuse me. You recall negotiations with owners Patrick Lenhart and Michael Lenhart in Buena Vista County?
Correct.
And those communications started in July of 2014, and they led up to early 2015. Would I characterize that correctly?
Well, actually, it was late 2015.
Okay. I think in your testimony there on line 12, or 11 and 12, it says a right-of-way agent met with Patrick Lenhart and his brother 3 times and talked by phone 14 times between July 23, 2014 and October 2nd, 2015. Would I have characterized that or said that testimony correctly?
You did.
Okay. So didn't the communication start as early as July of 2014?
Correct.
Okay. So now, Tech Desk, if you could publish Exhibit NILA Exhibit number 11.
And Mr. Murray, I do want to let you, this is the appropriate time to let you know that we are missing a couple exhibits, so when, so you did find it. Never mind.
Okay. And on NILA exhibit number 11, are you familiar with, let me just help you with this drawing if I may. Well, let me ask you, have you had a chance to review Mr. Linhart's testimony?
I have.
And also, I think accompanying that testimony was this map, right?
Could you repeat that? I didn't hear it.
Okay, accompanying that testimony, Mr. Linhart had referred to this exhibit being a map, correct?
I believe so.
Yes. And I believe it's a blow-up of a certain area within Buena Vista County. Would you agree with that characterization?
Yes.
And I see, if I could refer you to parcel IABU-073.000, do you see where it's located there on the map?
I do.
Okay. And from this map, it would appear that the proposed pipeline route runs along the southern portion of this parcel. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And is it your understanding that the Linharts believe that the pipeline should be moved to the north?
Objection. Witness cannot testify to the beliefs of another party.
It's in his testimony. I can direct him to there, but I think he does have knowledge of that, Your Honor.
He can speak to what the Lenharts said, but he doesn't have to. Go ahead.
Mr. Murray, do you know where it is? I'm not going to sustain it, but I want you to find it.
In his testimony?
Yes.
Okay, sure.
And I will give you the time to do that.
Thank you. Well, we can have the tech desk pull up the Johnson testimony, page 14, and we'll just use that time.
The basis of my objection is it's framed in terms of Mr. Johnson speaking of their belief rather than his recitation of the communications, and I believe those are two different things.
Do you want to rephrase your question, Mr. Murray?
Do you understand the concern posed by the Lenharts as a part of their communications on the routing of the pipeline?
Which concern are you talking about, or concerns, as you stated?
The routing of the pipeline on their property, which is on the south side.
Yes.
What were those concerns?
Well, the concern that I am aware of is their request to move the pipe 1,000 feet to the north,
okay,
or 300 to 400 feet separation from their turkey buildings.
Turkey buildings. Okay. Please publish NILA Exhibit 12. And go down to the map if you would. So as I show you this map, do you recognize it?
It appears to be a depiction of where the proposed pipeline is crossing north of what appears to be buildings.
Okay. And was this map created by Dakota Access?
No, that I don't know.
You don't know that?
I don't know that because I can't see any part other than this portion that's in front of me.
Okay. So, but it does appear to show what you've identified as the pipeline route as it crosses the Linhart parcel to the north there. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then with respect to those rectangular shaped structures to the south, would you say those are the turkey buildings, or you just don't know?
Actually, I've never been there, so I do not know.
And would the line in between the buildings and the pipeline route, would that be the southern border of that parcel we had identified earlier? Or would you know?
From this drawing, I can't tell.
Now, you mentioned a turkey operation, is that correct?
I did.
Okay. And you understood it to be a turkey operation owned and operated by the Linharts, correct?
Correct.
And so would you be able to approximately how far away the proposed pipeline route is to the turkey buildings?
Well, this is not scaled in any way, so I couldn't even begin to tell you what that is without any kind of scaling and measuring.
Okay. I'm going to check something, Your Honor. Okay. So would you agree that the Linharts discussed the possibility of moving the pipeline with the right-of-way agent on multiple occasions?
Yes.
And the Linharts explained to Dakota Access that their future potential expansion plans could likely involve the building of turkey buildings upon the southern portion of parcel IA-BU-073.000, correct?
Correct.
And as I understand it, you were just acting as a supervisor over the right-of-way agent or agents, would that be right?
That is correct.
Who were those agents, do you know?
Off the top of my head, I don't remember which agent.
And so is it in your position as the supervisor, as I understand it, you communicated with the construction manager on these requests by the Linharts. Do I have that right?
That is correct.
Who is the construction manager?
That would be Richard Tillman.
But he's not testifying today or during these proceedings, correct?
Not to my knowledge.
Now, your testimony reflects Dakota Access could not accommodate the Linharts in moving the pipeline to the north. Would I have that right?
That is correct.
Are you able to give the factors for why an alternate route was not available to the north, given the fact the Linharts had communicated with Dakota Access back to 2014?
Well, I couldn't give you the actuals that would have come from the construction department. Oftentimes, we will engage the construction division about requests of such, and they will usually give us a response. Not necessarily all the technical pieces involved with that response. But in this particular case, I can tell you just some of the limitations we run into. I've looked into this one in particular. As a matter of fact, I supervised the last maybe one or two agents that have dealt with this one. And given the unique way that the pipeline is coming across the property and then exits with the road and so on, and it's a narrow property. I know there are sometimes limitations based off of other easements in proximity that have been voluntarily bought, which then can create a problem for being able to move the line readily when we've already signed voluntary easements with parcels located near.
Were any voluntary easements signed up in July of 2014?
Yes. No, I'm sorry. I apologize. You said 2014.
Right.
No.
Okay. In fact, I think they weren't signing voluntary easements up until January of 2015. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
But you're saying that there was voluntary easements that were signed up later on, after communications had already started with the Lenharts, that somehow precluded the Lenharts moving their line to the north.
Well,
Objection.
Please state your objection.
Yeah, Your Honor, I think it's important to clarify what types of discussions we're having when, and Mr. Johnson's testimony is very clear that the initial conversation started with survey access, and I believe that he's being asked questions now that imply that there was some negotiation for placement of line on the property at that time, and I think it would be informative of the record to have that clarified.
Your Honor, I'd object to the characterization of the record. I'll refer to the direct testimony and to the witness's own statements earlier, but I would object to that characterization of the negotiations. I was referring back to what this witness earlier testified to, and I will note that Mr. Lenhart will be here to testify next week on the subject.
Yeah, Your Honor, when he asked Mr. Johnson to repeat and cite his testimony on page 14, he cut him off after he said the period of time that we talked with this landowner was ending in October of 2015. That goes on to say, initially in an effort to obtain survey access and after Buena Vista County informational meeting to negotiate an easement. That's the clarification I think is important to the questioning.
I would concede that. I would concede that. And I'll rephrase a question.
Why don't you rephrase the question? And
I'll rephrase the question, and actually,
you, Mr.
I just want to go a different direction. As I understand it, as I understand your testimony, you don't know which right-of-way agents spoke directly with Lenharts, do you?
I don't recall which agents spoke with Mr. Lenhart. There was more than one. I know that.
So, all right. I'm going to move on to another issue here. Let's go to your testimony.
Mr. Murray,
Yes.
Ms. Agramonte, will you please both meet me in the kitchen with council and the other two board members?
Certainly.
Mr. Murray, for your information, we pulled up Exhibit H that's been filed by Dakota Access. We didn't know if this drawing would assist you in describing the property any better than the other drawing. It doesn't have the poultry buildings, obviously, but
Right.
if you don't want this, we can go back to the other exhibit.
We'll leave it there.
All right.
I wanted to go back to the Linharts and just have a short, if we could go back to that other document. So on the screen is the Exhibit H for parcel, the Linhart parcel. You would agree with that, right?
Yes.
And there it is. It has the pipeline route going along the previously identified southern portion of their parcel, correct?
Yes.
And on that map, can you find out how many feet it is, for example, from the, well, how far is the pipeline located from the southern portion of the parcel?
I can't see it from this size. It's kind of small.
I wonder if they can blow it up for you. Now you can tell, right? On the, what would be the east side, it's 118 feet, and on the west side, it's, what is that number there? 398?
That looks like 398.65.
Now we're going. Okay. So let's go back to NYLA exhibit, oh boy. That one, yes. For the record, which one is that? NYLA exhibit 12. Thank you. So if I were to tell you that Mr. Linhart is going to testify that this is a document he received from a right-of-way agent at Dakota Access, and we just went on that assumption. I mean, I could show you his testimony. That's what it says. Can you, based upon the information that we gleaned from the last map on distances, can you approximate how far the pipeline is from those, what I'll say, turkey buildings are?
No, I can't. Actually, no, not without a measuring tool. And to be honest with you, those measurements are to the line, and I'm assuming this line is the same southern border line, and I have no idea what the distance is from that border line to that, what we consider to be buildings.
Okay.
No idea.
I think you answered that question about factors. Was there any other factors you wanted to tell the board about in rejecting the Linhart's request to move the pipeline to the north? Was there anything else?
Well, I just wanted to reiterate one thing. Again, the decision is made by the construction division and so on. What I offered you was one of the other issues that comes up commonly when people are trying to have changes made. That is, as we are getting more and more voluntary easements over the course of time, I can tell you it's limiting more and more where and how reroutes can be done.
But on this case, the construction manager is not going to be here to testify, so we won't know what the factors were here in the Linhart case, right?
It appears so.
Okay, fair enough. Now I want to go to the next issue, and I'm going to refer you to page 16 of your testimony, line 7, okay?
Page, can you repeat the page again?
Yeah, I'll give it to you again. Page 16, line 7.
Okay.
And we'll get it up on the screen here too. Okay, I'm going to start with the beginning of that answer by my mother. Mrs. Murray notes, excuse me, it's an answer of yours, I think, right?
Start line 6 on page 16, yes.
Yes. Mrs. Murray notes that she is on an, quote, inside 80, end quote, and asserts that Dakota DAPL has not identified an access route. And then here it is. Right-of-way agents are trained to know that if there is no temporary road use agreement with the easement, and there is none indicated on the sketch, the easement will be accessed along the easement only. Okay, I'll stop right there. All right?
Okay.
Now, I think it'd be helpful if we pulled up NYLA Exhibit 17. And thank you. And could you put the little hand over the denotation of Martha Murray there so everybody can see that? Okay. Do you see where Miss Murray's land is identified there?
Yes, according to this map, yes.
And then move that hand up there to the middle of the parcel, okay? So now, if we move the hand down just below, there's the road, correct?
I believe so, according to this drawing, yes.
That's a road on the south side of that parcel, correct?
That's what it appears, yes.
And then if we were to move that hand over to the left or the west, go on over, keep on going right there. Oh, you went too far, right there. That's the north-south road, is it not?
That's what it appears, yes.
And that north-south road is not a direct border to Mrs. Murray's inside 80, correct?
That is correct, according to this drawing.
Yep, sorry to cut you off.
Okay.
Then we'll move the hand to the right over and keep on going. And wouldn't that be the road that is 1 mile to the east?
I don't know the distance, but I will defer to your number.
Yep, okay, fair enough. But in any event, when Ms. Murray refers to an inside 80, you can see how she has the road on the south side, right?
Yes, I do that. I do see that.
Okay, so what do you mean? That was just the demonstration of what we're talking about here, okay? So we went back to your testimony because I want you to see the words you used in your testimony.
Mm-hmm.
And the question I have is, if there is no temporary road use agreement with the easement, and there is none indicated on the sketch, the easement will be accessed along the easement only. What do you mean by the easement will be accessed along the easement only?
What I'm saying is, even with your drawing, instead of there being a direct route from the nearest road to access that easement, unless there is a road agreement that says there's a road there that we can use and we would sign that agreement with the landowner, then that means that the Dakota Access has to access, let's say, a point on her property from one of the other cross streets and go and access that point on her property along the easement itself.
So let's pull up NYLA Exhibit 17, and maybe you can demonstrate that. Using the hand, if you would, and let's start with the road to the west, okay, and move that hand up there, okay, and keep on going where the road intersects that pipeline. Are you saying that now we're going to move the hand to what I think is the southeast along the pipeline route? Is that how they would need to get to the pipeline easement that is existing on her land?
If the need was to travel from that direction, yes.
Okay. Is there any necessity for an access easement otherwise for the permanent pipeline easement?
I don't understand that. What do you mean?
Is it necessary for this board to give any other access easements to the permanent pipeline other than the route that we just described on this farm?
Well, I mean, there may be the option to come from the other direction also.
Oh, I see. So if we kept on moving the hand along the pipeline over, let's go straight over to the road. That's the other way to get there, right?
That is correct.
Now, let's move that hand to the left along the road to the south. Let's keep on going, and we'll stop right there. Now, we're on a gravel road, and now, let's just say we've got the pipeline in the ground permanently, okay? Is Dakota Access saying that it's necessary to access the ground from where the hand is there, and then let's move it north to the pipeline.
Objection. The basis of my objection is Mr. Murray is asking the witness for questions about necessity for land rights. This witness can testify about the voluntary efforts that have been made to acquire easements. If questions are about what is needed or what is the company asking or what is required, those would go to Mr. Mahmood.
And that's a point taken, Your Honor. That's why I know I was pretty firm on the word necessity. I just wanted to, I'm fine with that. We'll defer to Mr. Mahmood. I just wanted to get to the bottom of his testimony, and apparently we have to defer to Mahmood on that point, okay?
All right, so I'm sustaining your motion.
Okay, I'm going to now go to the bottom of page 18 of your testimony. And this has to do with some negotiations concerning a Mr. Hickenbottom. Okay? There's a question about Mr. Hickenbottom testifies that he received multiple calls a day from right-of-way agents, and it goes on, okay? Is that right?
Correct, it does go on.
And just if you could refer to your answer in the next page so you have a chance to look at that. Did you ever have any direct dealings with Mr. Hickenbottom?
No, I have not.
Okay, so you wouldn't be able to, do you know who did? Who were the agents that dealt with Mr. Hickenbottom?
I don't recall the agents in particular, and I did try to put that to memory.
Were there any common records that your company kept with respect to the interactions that you had as a supervisor with your agents? In other words, when your agents told you negotiations occurring with landowners, were there regular records kept concerning these negotiations?
Yes.
Are we going to see those records?
I didn't know there is there. I don't have a request for records. So
Okay.
I didn't produce any. Bring any.
I'm going to have you turn to page 19, where we're referring to Mr. Lambert. If you want to have a chance to look at that.
Is there a place in particular?
Oh, no, I just wanted you to have a chance to refer to that testimony. Did you deal directly with Mr. Lambert?
No, I did not.
And I think there's some reference to family members of Mr. Lambert. Did you deal directly with any family members of Mr. Lambert?
No, I did not.
How about his attorney? Did you ever deal with him?
No.
Okay. Okay, then we'll go ahead and we'll skip that. Oh, well, let me ask you this question. Do you have an idea of who were the people that dealt with the Lamberts or their attorney? Would you have any idea who that is?
Are you referring to the agents?
Yes, sure.
Again, I didn't place to memory the agents. I didn't know there was a necessity to do that.
Okay. Turning to page 20, line 19 of your testimony, I believe that's the part of your testimony which applies to the direct testimony of Tom Kunz, correct?
Correct.
And Tom's wife is Ruth, correct?
Yes.
And she owns a parcel in O'Brien County that's affected by the pipeline. Would I have that right?
One moment. This would appear it's Sioux County.
Well, it's close. I don't know as if it's, well, let's go ahead and put it up there so we can identify the parcel. If I could have the tech desk bring up Not my exhibit, but I don't know if you can pull up the exhibit for IAOB-003.000, that parcel number. There you go. So this is, I think, the Exhibit H submission for, it appears, Ruth Kunz, correct?
That's correct.
So I'm not trying to trick you. I think this is a parcel that's on the county line between O'Brien and Sioux County. That might have been where you got tripped up before. But you would agree this is the parcel we're talking about, isn't it?
Well, I'm not sure. Miss, how do you pronounce the last name?
Kunz.
Kunz?
Yeah.
May have more than one property. Maybe have
Okay.
more than one tract. And
Well, in any event, for the board, I'll just note that that's the parcel I'm referring to. But if I could now pull up, the person that was being dealt with the Kunzes was Tom Kunz, not Ruth Kunz, correct? Your agents dealt with Tom, correct?
actually, I don't have a reference to the first name of Mr. Kunz.
Okay.
So I know that there's a Tom Worley who was an attorney, but I don't know Mr. Kunz's first name.
Okay, I wanted to refer to Mr. Kunz's direct testimony on page 4. We could pull that up. And I don't have line numbers, I have to apologize, but it is set out there on the bottom. If we can go down there. The question that he says he asked here is, if I don't sign this easement, does this mean that you have the right to take it by eminent domain, ? And then he said, and I'll tell you that he was the right-of-way agent, he said, you know that we will be coming through with the pipeline because it is pretty hard to stop big Texas oil money, and they will have to buy whoever they have to buy, end quote. Now, certainly you would have reviewed that in forming your reply testimony today, correct?
Yes.
And did you have a chance to speak with the right-of-way agent in this case?
No.
So is that, we don't know who that person is, that the right-of-way agent?
I do not, and the testimony didn't say who that was.
Okay.
And I don't necessarily know, nor does the so I don't know if one of our agents even said that.
Okay, well, if you could go up to the first part of the answer to that question. The question is, can you describe any of these other meetings? And the answer starts with, Mike kept coming out and kept pushing to have us sign. Would that help you as far as who Mike, do you have any Mikes for right-of-way agents?
Oh, let's think.
And let me suggest maybe it's Mike Streb, S-T-R-E-B. Does that come to mind?
We had an agent with that by that name, yes.
Okay.
Trying to think if we had more. There were quite a few agents we've had on the project.
Was Mike Streb an agent up in O'Brien County?
Yes, he was.
Okay. Well, I've had enough. Thank you.
Your Honor? I know
Yes.
that you had an intention of going to a certain time this evening. I would only request that whoever begins a cross-examination, that we complete that person and not break in the middle.
You don't want me to come back to Mr. Murray?
I don't want you to come back to anyone a second time, Your Honor.
I'm all done, but I have enjoyed working with counsel, actually. So, just for the record.
Are there any issues that need to come before the board before and prior to us recessing until Monday at 8:30?
Your Honor, should I gather that we did not have a willingness on behalf of other parties and or the board to release any of the 9 witnesses that I had said that we would be willing to waive if others were.
There has not been expression to do that. I think that it's more about, some people just want to get on the stand even though they know, they just want to experience it.
Sure, and that's why I didn't have any landowners on that list, I don't think.
I understand and I appreciate it. I think what my intent is to bring him on, get the testimony. We'll go through the process and we'll just keep moving, which is why I've provided, with agreement from the rest of the board, the witnesses for Monday, November 30th, and we have as many as we do. I intend on moving through those witnesses, using Mr. Johnson as the filler, and just moving forward. I'm going to see what Cecil wants, so hold on. Mr. Dublinsky or Miss Agramonte, is Dakota Access going to object to us requiring that you provide us with the names of the land agents so that we don't continue to go through, well, was it this person, was it that person? And I'm thinking more of the individuals that are the landowners that are going to be testifying. Let us know on Monday if you need to talk about it.
We'll do it.
And does anyone have anything else? Well, Mr. Dublinsky, before you respond to that question, apparently we would also like to have any and all records that Mr. Johnson has pertaining to the land acquisition easements.
Are you referring to the contact notes that Mr. Murray and Mr. Johnson were
Yes.
discussing about whenever there's a contact with the landowner, the agent
Yeah,
would log
I'm not
that?
sure what that is, but
We
we would like to have that.
Yeah, that also has the land agent's name, so it will actually take care of your other question as well.
All right, perfect.
Sorry,
Ms.
I do-
Agramonte?
Sorry. Mr. Johnson was asked questions about specific landowners in his testimony. What is the scope of the contact notes that the board would like to see?
The scope would be just the landowners to which he's testified, and I don't believe there's anything on Mr. Hoyer's, but to the extent there's testimony on it, we want those records. We'd like them filed in EFS for the parties to access. Mr. Putney.
Those of us who will be testifying, for those of us who will be testifying, since those are applicable to us as well, can we get copies of their notes for those of us who will be testifying as landowners?
Your Honor, just to clarify, and I had assumed that was in the scope. Here's what I guess I would propose. We will file the notes for anyone that is discussed in our testimony, landowners mentioned by name, and for any landowner who is on the witness list in the case.
Perfect.
And will we be provided copies of those?
It'll be filed in the electronic filing system with the Utilities Board, which you have access to.
All right, thank you.
Are there any other questions to come before the Iowa Utilities Board? You have the witness schedule. I intend on starting at 8:30, and I will see everyone. Have a happy Thanksgiving. We're recessed until Monday, November 30th at 8:30 a.m.